Before this story breaks your heart, hit subscribe because this isn't just another tale of a forgotten grandmother. This is the story of a woman who weaponized her own senility to catch a murderer. And by the end, you'll question every confused old lady you've ever judged. Look at these hands. They've flipped 10,000 burgers, sewn 100 school uniforms, held one little boy through every fever. Now they tremble, trying to knit. The needle slipskin gives way and a single drop of blood falls onto cream-colored yarn. But she doesn't stop. She can't stop. Every stitch is a witness. Every dropped loop is a date. Every mistake is evidence she collects in plain sight. The phone rings in a 50-story boardroom. Jason, the millionaire's son, hears his cook, Margaret's voice small, terrified. Mr. Jason, Mrs. Dorothy's pills are gone, all of them, and sir, she's been writing nonsense on recipe cards for weeks. He sighs, checks his watch. Just her dementia acting up again. Margaret. But Margaret's next word freezes his blood. Sir, I think she's trying to tell us something. I think she knows. Now see what Dorothy sees. The world tilts, marble floors become liquid, walls breathe. Tiffany's face swims into view, all shark teeth and emerald silk. Here, Mom, your medicine. The pills rattle like tiny bones. Dorothy's hand reaches out, but her fingers, those same trembling fingers, hide a secret. She watches Tiffany flush something down the toilet. A white cap spins in the water. Her own face shows only confusion. Vacant eyes. A helpless smile. Inside, a voice screams, I see you. I see everything, and I'm writing it down.com, and I see you below. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been dismissed because you're just the old woman in the corner, if you've ever had to whisper your own truth. But what Margaret found in those nonsense scribbles, those rambling poems about bluebirds and recipes that made no sense, would prove Dorothy wasn't losing her mind. She was building a case, one stitch at a time. 30 years. That's how long these hands flipped burgers on a griddle so hot it blistered her knuckles. 30 years of listening to the hiss of grease, the clatter of plates, the clink of pennies dropped into a metal coffee can hidden beneath a cot that can held Jason's future. Every sweaty coin, every burned fingertip, every shift that started before sunrise and ended after midnight. She raised him in a trailer that smelled of bacon and hope. The walls were thin, but their love was thick. When he skinned his knee, she'd patch it with a scrap of fabric from her one good dress. When he came home with straight A's, she'd serve him pancakes shaped like castles. When I grow up, Mom, he'd whisper, missing a front tooth, I'm gonna build you a real castle, the biggest one in Seattle. She'd ruffle his hair and laugh. Just bring me a window with sunshine, baby. That's all I need. But sons remember promises differently than mothers. 30 years later, Jason's castle rose on a hill, 50 rooms, marble floors that reflected your face like ice, windows taller than their old trailer. He stood at the wrought iron gates, tears in his eyes. Welcome home, Mom, your castle. Dorothy hugged him, felt his expensive suit under her calloused palms. She left behind her threadbare couch, her geranium pots, her noisy neighbor who always shared tomatoes. She left behind a life that was alive. The mansion was beautiful and dead. On her first morning, Tiffany came in with a smile that matched the honey in Dorothy's tea. Let me handle your medicine, Mom, you just rest. She swept the pill bottles into a silk-lined box with a lock. Dorothy watched those manicured fingers that had never touched a griddle count out her life in tiny white tablets. She speaks like honey, Dorothy thought, but her eyes inventory me like property. Those eyes said, you are a problem to be managed, not a person to be loved. That night, Dorothy pulled out her old knitting journal from her battered suitcase. The leather cover was soft as skin, filled with patterns she'd designed 30 years ago. Baby blankets for Jason, scarves for neighbors, a shawl for Margaret when she first got hired. She hid it under the mattress, a piece of her old life in this new coffin. The next afternoon, Tiffany found it. She flipped through the pages, scoffed, Oh, Mom, sentimental clutter. You shouldn't fill your head with this nonsense. She tossed it back onto the nightstand like garbage. Dorothy smiled. A small, secret smile. Good, she whispered to the empty room. She thinks it's worthless. And the most dangerous thing you can call a woman with a plan is worthless. Day 5. Dorothy sits in the pale morning light that floods the breakfast room, light so clean it feels sterile. Tiffany enters with a silver tray, pills arranged like tiny soldiers in formation. Mom, your medicine. She doesn't hand them over. She places them on the tongue herself, tilts the water glass to Dorothy's lips. watches her swallow with the focus of a scientist observing a specimen. Dorothy's throat moves obediently, but halfway down, she lets a single pill lodge beneath her tongue. Bitter, chalky, proof of life. Tiffany smiles, satisfied. Good girl. Day 7. Tiffany brings a kale smoothie, green as envy, thick as lies. Dorothy takes it with trembling hands. She sips once, twice. Then she lets her fingers go limp. The glass tips. Green sludge spreads across marbles so polished you can see your soul in it. Oh, Mom. Tiffany cries, but her reflection in the floor shows something else, eyes that narrow with calculation, not concern. She kneels to wipe it up, her back turned. And Dorothy, the confused old woman, the burden, the nuisance, she sees everything. Later that afternoon, when the house falls into the hush that comes between lunch and Tiffany's afternoon calls, Dorothy wanders. That's the word they'll use. Wandered, confused. She shuffles down the hall in her soft slippers, touching the walls for balance. She moves past the master suite, where Tiffany's voice purrs into her phone about Prada and power lunches. Dorothy doesn't stop. She drifts inside like a ghost. The jewelry box sits open, diamonds wink in the sunlight, and there, tucked beneath a velvet cushion like a secret her pill bottle. The one Tiffany said she flushed, the one she said Dorothy imagined. She picks it up, feels the weight of pills inside, counts them with her thumb. 7 left. Enough for a week. She doesn't scream, doesn't confront. She places it back exactly as she found it and shuffles out, humming TUNELESS lie. In her room. She opens her knitting journal, the one Tiffany dismissed as sentimental clutter. She takes a pen, blue ink, the color of loyalty, and writes, "The bluebird sings at midnight when the roses forget to bloom." The letters are shaky, deliberate, the handwriting of a woman losing her grip. Margaret finds her there, hunched over the page. "You okay, ma'am?" The cook's voice is soft as flour dust. Dorothy looks up with eyes so vacant they could be windows into an empty house. "Have you seen my bluebird, Margaret?" She tilts her head like a child. "I can't find it anywhere." Margaret's mouth tightens. She sees the journal, sees the nonsense. But she also sees something else, the way Dorothy's hand grips the pen just a little too tight, the way her gaze, for half a second, holds a spark that shouldn't be there. "Bluebirds are tricky, ma'am," Margaret says carefully. "They hide when they need to." Dorothy nods slowly, returning to her scribbles. "Yes, they hide." Pause this video right now. Ask yourself, what would you do if you were Dorothy? If the person who promised to care for you was slowly stealing your life, and no one believed you because you're just confused? Would you fight back? Or would you flee? Dorothy chose neither. She chose something far more dangerous. She chose to play the part. They wrote for her until she could rewrite the ending herself. The house never sleeps, it just pretends. Dorothy lies in bed, listening to Tiffany's heels, clicking downstairs. Click dash click dash click. Each step is a countdown. Each echo is a threat. The sound stops outside her door. A pause, then the soft snick of a lock turning. She's locked in again. In the dark, Dorothy stares at the ceiling, plastered to look like clouds. But she sees only concrete. She thinks about a crime show Jason watched last year, something about a woman who couldn't prove her husband was poisoning her. The detective said, "If you're ever in danger and no one believes you, create a paper trail only you understand." That line lit a fuse in her mind. That night, the plan forms in 3 clear phases. Phase 1, become what they already think you are. Exaggerate the symptoms. Stumble more. Forget names. Let them see you as harmless, confused, a little old lady who couldn't possibly be a threat. Let Tiffany feel so safe she gets sloppy. Phase 2, hide the truth in plain sight. Every dropped stitch in her knitting would mark a day without medication. Every crazy recipe would record dosages. The apple pie that needed 0 cups of memory. The grocery list that always had 3 items, the third being code for "Tiffany lied about my pills today." Only Dorothy would know the language. Only someone who truly saw her would understand. Phase 3. Wait for the mistake big enough to make the pattern undeniable. One final act of cruelty that would turn her scattered nonsense into a prosecutor's roadmap. She would be patient. She had been poor. Patience was her oldest skill. 3 days later, the phone rings in her room. Jason's voice, thin through the speaker. "Hi, Mom, it's me." Dorothy lets the silence stretch, lets her breathing sound ragged. Then, in the most vacant voice she can muster, Who's calling?" A sigh, long, tired. "Mom, it's me, Jason, your son." Behind him, she hears Tiffany's soft laugh. sees her smirk even through the phone line. She's getting worse, baby. I told you. Dorothy's face stays blank as a fresh page, but behind her eyes, a voice as sharp as a knife recites. Jason called, 3:42 p.m. Tiffany present. Mocking evidence. Logged. She is a camera disguised as a ghost. That afternoon, she starts a new knitting project, a blanket for her future great-grandchild, the one she might never meet if Tiffany succeeds. The pattern is intricate, beautiful, full of color, and every seventh row, she drops a stitch, deliberately, sloppily. The mistake looks like the tremor of old age, but Dorothy knows. Each dropped loop marks a week without her heart medicine. Each uneven gap is a day Tiffany thought she could kill her without leaving a mark. By the time she finishes, the blanket won't just be warm, it'll be a calendar of attempted murder, and the woman who can read that calendar hasn't found her yet, but she will, because Dorothy is betting everything on one truth, that there is more honor in a single loyal heart than in a palace full of people who look away. Click, 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 the heels again. Dorothy pulls the yarn tight, smiles at her mistake, and waits. 30 days. That's how long it takes to build a case when you're building it in code. Margaret finds the first one tucked under a saucer in the breakfast room, a recipe card for apple pie, written in Dorothy's shaky hand. 2 cups flour, 1 cup sugar, 0 cups memory. The 0 is carved deep, pressed so hard the pen almost tore the paper. The next day, another card, lemon bars this time, 3 tablespoons zest, 2 cups butter, 0 cups memory. Margaret stacks them in her apron pocket like she's collecting stamps. By day 4, she has 4 cards, all desserts, all ending with the same impossible ingredient, 0 cups memory. Downstairs, Dorothy wanders into the kitchen. She picks up a notepad, the kind Tiffany uses for grocery lists. She writes in that same wandering script, milk, eggs, forget -meat -knots. Tiffany finds it later, rolls her eyes. Mom, forget-me-nots aren't food. You're so confused. She crumples it, tosses it, but Margaret smooths that paper flat, because Dorothy never wrote 3 items. She always wrote 3, milk, eggs, and a third thing that made no sense, a flower, a bird, a color, always 3, always a lie. Upstairs, Dorothy knits. The blanket grows row by row, soft as clouds, but every 7th roll, like clockwork, she drops a stitch, deliberately. The gap looks like the tremor of age, the stumble of failing hands, but Margaret counts. 7 days, 1 gap, 7 days, 1 gap. The knitting is a calendar. The mistakes are Sundays. The Sundays are the days Tiffany visits the pharmacy. The breakthrough comes on day 23. Margaret finds a card that isn't a recipe. It's just a sentence, scrawled on the back of a prescription leaflet. The roses died on Tuesday. Tiffany wore red. Margaret stares at those words until her vision blurs. Dorothy never grew roses. The mansion garden is manicured by professionals. There are no roses, but there is a Tuesday. There was a Tuesday 2 weeks ago when Tiffany came home with shopping bags from Nordstrom. Margaret remembers because she unpacked them 5 dresses, all red. She'd hung them in the master closet, the color of blood. The roses didn't die. Dorothy's hope did. Margaret stays up all night. She spreads every card, every list, every piece of trash Dorothy has written across her small kitchen table. 47 scraps of paper. 47 days. She sees it now. The recipe cards track medication. The grocery lists track lies. The third item, that's the day's deception. Forget-me-nots means Tiffany lied about the pills. Bluebird means Tiffany hid the bottle. Roses means Tiffany wore the color of murder. And the knitting. Margaret pulls out the half-finished blanket, counts the dropped stitches. 7, 14, 21. She checks Tiffany's pharmacy receipts. She's been stealing them from the trash for weeks. Tiffany refills her own anxiety medication every 21 days. Lorazepam, the kind that causes confusion, dizziness, memory loss in elderly patients if swapped for heart medication. The dropped stitches align perfectly. 3 weeks, 21 days, 1 refill. This isn't a blanket. It's a toxicology report written in wool. If you're loving this mystery, share this video right now. Someone out there needs to hear that their confusion might be their greatest strength, that the words you dismiss as nonsense might be someone's last cry for help, because Dorothy wasn't documenting her decline. She was drafting her survival. And the woman who finally learned to read her language just called her nephew, the one who works for the DA's office. She told him, "I need you to look at a quilt. It tells a story about a woman trying not to die." He said, "Auntie, quilts don't talk." she answered. This one does. You just need to know how to listen. Tomorrow, he comes to the mansion. He brings a warrant and a nurse. He brings people who finally speak Dorothy's language. Asterisk 30 days of evidence. That's what Margaret finds scattered like breadcrumbs through a house that costs more than her entire neighborhood. It starts with a recipe card tucked under Dorothy's dinner plate. Margaret recognizes the handwriting shaky like a child's, but pressed so hard the pen tears the paper. Apple pie, it reads, 2 cups flour, 1 cup sugar, 0 cups memory. That 0 is carved deep, a trench in the cards. Margaret frowns. Mrs. Doherty never forgot ingredients. She could bake an entire Thanksgiving meal from muscle memory alone. Then the grocery lists. Always 3 items, never more. Milk, eggs, forget-me-nots. Dorothy never bought flowers, said they were a waste when she had her garden, but every 3 days, there's a new list on the counter. And that third item, forget-me-nots, bluebonnets, wisteria. Margaret starts to see it in the calendar in her head. Those are the days Mrs. Dorothy looks worst. The days Tiffany has that particular smile. The knitting is where it clicks. Dorothy's new blanket is beautiful, intricate, but every 7th row has a dropped stitch. Sloppy, uncharacteristic. Margaret knows this woman has knitted for 60 years. Her hands might shake, but muscle memory doesn't forget. She counts the rows between errors. 7, always 7. A week, the blanket has 6 dropped stitches so far. 6 weeks. Margaret finds a card slipped behind the bathroom mirror. The roses died on Tuesday. Tiffany wore red. Dorothy never grew roses. She hated them, said they were fickle and demanding, just like people who loved them. But Tiffany wore red last Tuesday, a dress the color of fresh blood. The same day Mrs. Dorothy collapsed in the hallway, and Tiffany told everyone she'd forgotten to eat. The breakthrough comes on day 31. Margaret is dusting Tiffany's vanity and sees the pharmacy receipt. Benzodiazepines, anxiety medication, refilled on March 3rd. Margaret's heart stops. March 3rd was the first day Mrs. Dorothy wrote about the bluebird singing off-key. The first day she slept 16 hours and couldn't remember Jason's name. The first day of the dropped stitches. Margaret rushes to Dorothy's knitting bag, counts the rows, the errors, cross-references the dates in her head. Every single dropped stitch aligns with the day Tiffany picked up her own prescription, not Mrs. Dorothy's heart medication. The nonsense poems, the grocery lists, the recipe cards, they're not senility. They're a logbook, a calendar of theft and substitution. If you're loving this mystery, share this video right now. Someone out there needs to hear that their confusion might be their greatest strength, that their so-called nonsense might be the only thing saving them. Because what Margaret found in those scribbles wasn't a broken mind, it was a forensic masterpiece, stitched in yarn and spelled out in sugar and flour. A woman preserving her own murder in plain sight. Day 40. The number burns in Dorothy's chest like a second heartbeat. 47 days since her last real dose of Losa. 47 days of her heart running a marathon. It was never built to win. The dizziness isn't fake anymore. The chest tightness is real, an anaconda wrapped around her ribs, squeezing with every breath. She can feel her own pulse in her teeth. She needs her medication now, not tomorrow, not after Tiffany's lunch. Now. Tiffany knows it too. She comes into Dorothy's room wearing victory-like perfume. In her hand, the final bottle, Dorothy's emergency stash, the one she thought she'd hidden in her old trunk. Tiffany holds it up, lets the pills rattle like a taunt. Looking for these, Mom? She doesn't wait for an answer. She walks to the bathroom, heels clicking a death march on marble. Dorothy tries to follow, but her legs are water. She watches from the doorway as Tiffany pops the cap and tips the bottle. White tablets rain into the toilet like tiny tombstones. Plink, plink, plink. Oops, Tiffany says, her face a mask of fake concern in the mirror. You must have done that in your confusion. Silly me for trusting you with them. She flushes. The sound of the water is a roar. The last anchor of Dorothy's life disappears down porcelain. Dorothy doesn't cry, doesn't scream. She just folds. Her knees hit the hallway floor first, then her shoulder. Her cheek rests against cold stone. And she feels her heart do something wrong, something that sounds like a drum out of rhythm. Thump dash thump thump thump. The world telescopes. She sees Tiffany's shoes stop beside her head, sees her bend down, not with panic, but with a smile that could cut glass. Let me help you, Mom. She grabs Dorothy under the arms, drags her down the hall. Dorothy's head bumps against the floor, once, twice. She's too weak to fight. Tiffany doesn't take her to the bedroom. That would be too kind. She drags her to the living room, to the big leather armchair in the shadows. She arranges Dorothy like a broken doll head, lolled to the side, hands limp in her lap. There, she whispers, brushing dust from her hands. Let the staff see how far gone she is. Let them watch the show. Then she walks away, humming, pouring herself a drink, waiting for the final breath. The house holds its silence. Margaret finds her an hour later. The cook was supposed to be polishing silver in the dining room, but something pulled her toward the living room, a tug in her gut that felt like fishing line hooked to her conscience. She sees the shape in the chair, sees the gray skin, the bluish lips. Mrs. Dorothy, she whispers, running. She touches her wrist pulse like a butterfly's wing, there and gone. Oh God, oh God. She's got the scarf in her apron pocket, the stained one, the proof. She could run to the police now, show them the chemical residue, the knitting codes, the grocery lists that don't make sense. But Dorothy is dying in her arms. If she leaves to make the call, this woman, this friend, will be cold before the ambulance arrives. Margaret's hands shake as she dials her phone. Not 911. Not yet. She hits a number she memorized months ago, a number that felt like paranoia at the time. It rings once, twice. Diane, it's Margaret. I need you to answer me straight. If someone swapped heart medication with benzos, would it show up in a blood test if the person might already be dying? Her sister's voice is sharp. Absolutely. But why would you? Because I've got proof. Margaret's voice breaks. But I think I'm too late. This is the moment that decides everything. The moment where proof is useless if the witness is dead, where a son's blindness becomes a mother's death sentence, where every second is a choice. Run for help, or stay and watch her slip away. Comment NOW below if you feel the urgency. If your heart is pounding, if you're screaming at your screen for Margaret to do something, because you understand that justice means nothing. If it arrives in a hearse. Margaret's hands don't shake when she needs bread. They don't shake when she debones a chicken or carries a tray of crystal glasses up 3 flights of stairs. But right now, holding this cheap plastic prepaid phone, they tremble so hard she can barely hit the buttons. She bought it 3 weeks ago at a gas station, a paranoid impulse that felt insane at the time. Now it feels like prophecy. She's hidden in the pantry, behind sacks of imported flour. Tiffany demanded but never uses. Dorothy is dying in the living room. Tiffany is upstairs, humming while she changes for a gala. This is the only 30 seconds Margaret will get. The phone rings once, twice. Hello. Jason's voice, impatient, distracted. The voice of a man who thinks he's in control of his universe. Mr. Jason, it's Margaret, the cook. She whispers so fast the words trip over each other. You need to come home, now. Your mother is dying and it's not senility, it's murder. I have proof. In his 50th floor boardroom, Jason freezes. His pen stops mid-signature on a $50 million merger. The phone in his hand shows unknown caller. He was about to hang up, to bark at an assistant for letting a telemarketer through, but the word murder lands like a bulletproof vest, stopping his heart. Margaret, what the hell? Listen to me. Her voice cracks, desperate. She's been writing things, in her knitting patterns, in recipe cards, grocery lists that don't make sense. But they do make sense, sir. They make perfect sense. She's been tracking every pill, every lie, every day that woman stole your mother's medicine. Jason's blood turns to ice. He knows his mother knits when she's anxious. She's been knitting nonstop for weeks, nonstop since the day she moved in. He'd seen the growing pile of blankets and thought it was just her way of coping. But now ... Margaret whispers the line that shatters his denial. She left you a message in the knitting. Sir, in the recipe cards. It's all there. The boardroom disappears. The deal, the investors, his empire, they vaporize. All he sees is his mother, tiny in that marble palace, whispering a truth no one could hear because they'd all decided she was already gone. Call 911, he says, voice flat with shock. I'm coming. He hangs up, stares at his phone. The knitting, the recipes, the confusion. It wasn't decay, it was a signal flare, and he'd been too blind to see it. Drop a below if you're holding on to hope. If you believe that even when the truth is whispered by the powerless, it can still bring kings to their knees, because Jason is finally listening. The question is, will he get there before his mother's last breath becomes her final period? He doesn't take the elevator. He takes the stairs 2 at a time, 3 at a time, flying down 50 floors like a man being pulled by a string tied to his mother's fading heartbeat. Every step is a countdown. Every landing is a reminder. You were too late to see. You cannot be too late to save. The traffic outside is a war zone. Horns, red lights, a sea of steel blocking his path. He drives like a maniac, like a man who has already lost everything and is fighting to get one piece back. In the mansion, Margaret kneels beside Dorothy. The paramedics are coming. The proof is in her apron. The knitting bag sits by the chair, harmless as a kitten until you know how to read its claws. Jason is listening, but the real question is, has he been silent too long? Jason's car doesn't brake, it screams. Tires eat gravel, spit it out behind him as he fishtails into the service entrance. He doesn't park, he leaves it running, door hanging open, a red blink of hazard lights pulsing like a dying heart. He takes the kitchen steps 3 at a time, his hand on the doorknob. Turn, push, now. The door explodes inward. He doesn't call for his mother. He sees her. She's slumped in the farthest armchair, gray as the marble she sits on, unmoving. Her chest barely rises shallow, a whisper, a dead woman breathing. Jason's whole world narrows to that single, fragile motion. Everything else, his empire, his pride, his blindness, disintegrates. Tiffany doesn't hear him. She's by the fireplace, her back to the door, holding a brandy sniff. The amber liquid catches the light as she swirls it. She's humming, actually humming, and then she whispers, just loud enough for the empty room to hear. Finally, a little piece. The glass shatters before she can turn. Jason doesn't roar. He doesn't need to. His presence is the roar, the way he fills the doorway, the way his shadow swallows her whole. Tiffany spins, brandy splashing across her black dress, shards of crystal exploding at her feet. Her face perfect, practiced, cruel cracks open into raw panic. He doesn't look at her. He looks at Margaret, who stands frozen by the chair, clutching the white scarf. The stain is yellow-brown, ugly proof. What, Jason says, voice flat as a blade, is that stain? Margaret's hands shake as she holds it out, not toward him, toward the truth. Your wife's anxiety medication, sir, in Mrs. Dorothy's teacup. I found it 3 weeks ago. Margaret swallows hard. She documents every day. In her knitting, the words make no sense, and yet they make perfect sense. Jason's eyes drop to Dorothy's knitting bag, slumped by the chair like a loyal dog. He reaches in, pulls out a recipe card. His mother's shaky handwriting crawls across it. The bluebird stopped singing on March 3rd. Tiffany bought roses. March 3rd. He remembers that day. Tiffany had come home with shopping bags, gushing about a new rose bush for the garden. He'd signed the credit card slip without looking. But now he remembers something else. The pharmacy receipt on the counter, a refill not for Dorothy's heart meds, for Tiffany's own anxiety prescription. The realization hits like a sledgehammer to the chest. The roses were a cover story. The refill was the weapon. You're not going anywhere, he says. Not to Margaret, but to the air itself. Call 911. Tell them attempted murder. Tell them we have physical evidence. Tiffany lunges. She moves like a struck snake. All elegance gone. Just pure, desperate hunger to destroy. Her fingers claw for the knitting bag, for the journal, for every scrap of paper that holds her guilt. But Jason's hand is faster. He catches her wrist midair, twists it just enough to hear bone grind. Not break, just stop. You're not destroying this, he says, pulling her close enough to smell the brandy on her breath. This is her testimony, and you're going to watch them read every single word. The knitting bag stays in his other hand, safe. The scarf stays in Margaret's. The truth stays alive. And Tiffany trapped, exposed, her perfect world shattered into more pieces than the glass at her feet, realizes the most terrifying thing of all. The old woman she thought she was killing had already built her prison, one stitch at a time. The hospital room smells like antiseptic and miracles. Dorothy's eyes flutter open, not the vague, milky gaze of a confused old woman, but the sharp, clear focus of a survivor. Her fingers twitch in Jason's hand, and he nearly weeps. Then the detective clears his throat from the doorway, badge glinting under fluorescent lights. Mrs. Dorothy, I need your statement, but your daughter-in-law's lawyer has raised a concern. The lawyer steps forward, sleek in his suit, holding papers like a shield. Mrs. Dorothy suffers from documented dementia. Her testimony is therefore unreliable. We have medical records indicating cognitive decline, confusion, memory lapses. Dorothy doesn't let him finish. Her voice cuts through the room, not the quavering whisper they expect, but the strong, clear tone of a woman 30 years younger. Dementia, she says, was my only defense against a murderer. Now that I'm safe, I remember everything. The silence is absolute. The lawyer's mouth opens, closes, and then Dorothy does the thing that will be clipped, shared, and remembered by 10 million people. She closes her eyes and recites, word perfect, the nonsense poem she wrote 47 days ago. The bluebird sings at midnight when the roses forget to bloom. She opens her eyes. Translation. On March 3rd, at midnight, Tiffany flushed my heart medication down the toilet after I refused to sign over my life insurance beneficiary. She wore red. She smiled. The roses in the garden were her alibi. The detective's pen stops moving. Jason's grip tightens. The bluebird stopped singing on March 10th. Dorothy continues, voice rising. That means she switched my pills for her anxiety medication. I found them in her jewelry box. I tasted the difference. I wrote it down in my knitting, on a grocery list that said milk, eggs, forget, me-nots, single quotes. The third item was always code. Forget-me-nots meant she lied about my medicine today. The evidence dump lands like artillery fire. 47 days of knitting patterns. Detective every dropped stitch marks a day without my heart medication. Row 7, stitch 12 dropped. That was February 14th. The day Tiffany told Jason I was attention-seeking while I was having chest pains. Recipe cards. Sir, apple pie 2 cups, flour, 1 cup sugar, 0 cups memory. That 0 was carved so deep it tore the paper. 0 milligrams of losartan that day. The scarf. Margaret steps forward, holding the white fabric like a holy relic. The tea stain isn't tea, it's benzodiazepine residue. I smelled it. Tiffany's prescription, same chemical signature. The detective's face has gone from professional skepticism to stunned belief. Dorothy pushes herself up in bed, frail but fierce. I am not confused. I was never confused. I was cornered, so I became invisible. I became senile. I became exactly what she needed me to be, until I had enough rope to hang her with. The lawyer tries one last time. You expect us to believe. I expect you, Dorothy says, staring him down, to read the patterns. That's what they're for. The detective nods. He pulls out handcuffs. Not for Dorothy, for Tiffany. They arrest her in the hallway, body cam rolling. She's still in her gala dress, diamonds at her throat. When the cold steel clicks around her wrists, you can't, she hisses. I'm his wife, and she's his mother, the detective says. One of them built a testimony, the other built a case. Guess which one held up? The charges stacked like bricks. Attempted murder, elder abuse, felony fraud for insurance manipulation, criminal negligence, poisoning. Tiffany is led past Dorothy's open door. Their eyes meet, one pair clear and victorious, the other wild with disbelief that this frail, senile woman just unraveled her entire life with a pair of knitting needles. As she disappears down the hall, Dorothy settles back into her pillows. She looks at Jason. You know what the hardest part was? He shakes his head, tears streaming. Pretending to forget your name. This is what justice looks like. Not a trash bag on a driveway. Not public humiliation. It's an old woman reclaiming her voice. It's proof that being underestimated is a weapon. It's a paper trail written in yarn and recipes. And a detective smart enough to read the stitches. Share this video if you believe every voice matters, even whispers. Because Dorothy's whisper just convicted a murderer. And somewhere out there, another confused grandmother is watching. And tonight, she'll pick up her needles, and she'll start writing. 2 months later, Dorothy receives anonymous mail. The knitting needle matches the one Tiffany used, but Tiffany is in jail. The enclosed card has a knitting pattern. Dorothy decodes it. The bluebird has sisters. The twist. Tiffany didn't act alone. Someone in Jason's company helped her access Dorothy's medical records. Final scene. Jason's phone rings. Unknown number. He answers. A woman's voice. Tell your mother her knitting is famous in certain circles. We'll be in touch. This story isn't over. Subscribe and hit the bell for part 2. The confession quilt. Because some patterns reveal more than they hide. 2 months later, the farmhouse is alive with crickets and peace. Dorothy sits on the porch, rocking, a new blanket flowing from her needle's no codes, just colors. The sun sinks low, painting everything gold. The past feels like a nightmare she's finally woken from, until the mail comes. It's a plain envelope, no return address. Her name typed in a font she doesn't recognize. Inside, a single knitting needle, silver size 7. exactly like the ones Tiffany used to keep in her room, the ones the police confiscated as evidence, and a card, white, blank except for a tiny knitted pattern drawn in ink, pearl knit, pearl, drop stitch, a sequence that makes Dorothy's blood freeze. She decodes it in seconds. The pattern spells, the bluebird has sisters. Tiffany is in jail, but the bluebird, the code for the pharmacy visits, the medication swaps, wasn't acting alone. Someone taught her how to access Dorothy's medical records. Someone in Jason's own company provided the blueprint for the perfect murder. That night, Jason's phone rings. Unknown number. He almost doesn't answer. He's learned to be cautious, but something pulls at him. He picks up a woman's voice, smooth as silk, cold as steel. Tell your mother her knitting is famous in certain circles. We'll be in touch. The line goes dead. He looks at Dorothy across the kitchen table. She holds the needle between her fingers like a weapon she thought she could set down. But some patterns don't end. Some stories unravel only to reveal a larger knot. This story isn't over. Subscribe and hit the bell for part 2. The confession quilt, because some patterns reveal more than they hide. And the next stitch might be the one that saves her life again.